The NHL season is underway, and we've got your way too early team trends to dig into, plus which individual players are standouts this first week of NHL action. We've got all that and the weekend ahead of NHL games to preview on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. How are we doing this first week of NHL action, Gil?
We are doing well. Hockey is back. It's real. It's here. The games count, and I'm loving it. I am loving it.
Yeah, me too. Gotta dig into this, team action report early. Totally way too early to be making any conclusions about any of this, but there are certainly some fun storylines to start off the season. We have to give a little asterisk here because there are 5 teams left who have not played a single NHL game this season. My Philadelphia Flyers are one of them, along with the Washington Capitals, Tampa Bay Lightning, Carolina Hurricanes, and Anaheim Ducks. So they're out of these early team stories, although two of them are, I guess, kind of part of the story, given the actual hurricane.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
We'll get into that when we preview the week ahead. I think for me, the biggest opening story has to be Utah hockey because they are 2-0 to start their inaugural season, winning their opener against the Blackhawks in very exciting fashion. And then last night, winning in overtime against, unfortunately for you, Gil, your New York Islanders. But what are you thinking about this new team to start the season?
They look really good. They have some real good team speed. They've got some guys who can put the puck in the net. They seem to be well coached at this early juncture of the season. Yeah. I think they are going to surprise a few people. And by the time the season is over, I don't know if they'll make the playoffs, but I think they'll be in it until the very end if they don't.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting about it because it's somewhere in between an expansion team and a relocation in terms of the roster, right? Where they kept like a core from the Coyotes, but there's a lot of new blood there too. And there's a lot of young blood there that hadn't really kind of formed their identity as Arizona Coyotes. So they're just part of this new team here. So I feel like the energy is somewhere in between. But that opening game they had was so exciting to watch. And again, as I've mentioned on the show before, I used to live in Salt Lake City. When I lived there, the biggest dream we all thought we could have was to have the Utah Grizzlies, who were in the ECHL, moved up to the AHL. Like that was the pinnacle of the dream for us. Really, it was.
Yeah.
And to see NHL hockey in this town and to see it embraced, the energy at the arena. Shout out to the beer sales record they set in the arena as well. I'm very proud. Very, very proud of them for that. But I think, they're off to a really good start.
They are. And there was a great vibe in the building for the opening game. And it sort of, met expectations, even though, right now the arena they're in is not going to be the long-term home of the team unless it gets renovated. So,
right.
I just think Utah did a really good job at the home opener, both in the arena and on the ice. And against the Islanders last night, they just looked like a team that you can't take lightly, that they can do some real damage this season.
Yeah, again, early going, but
Yes.
always good to see a new team get off to a good start. I think, the other team that maybe people would not have expected to talk about this early in the season, the St. Louis Blues, have 2 straight games, 2 straight comeback wins here.
Yeah, and both of them on the road, no less. And you got to like the moxie of this team in the first couple of games. I don't think a lot of people were expecting the Blues to get off to this kind of a start. And here they are finding ways to win hockey games early. You got to be impressed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a team, that people have had, to be fair, some middling
Right.
expectations for this season. And so to see them off to a good start, maybe that gives them some jump to start the season and rack up some early points. We'll see how they do. The defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers always got to talk about how that uh, championship team does in early going in the following season. And, there's always this fear for the defending cup champions to lose their opening game when they raise the banner and everything. But they did manage to win that opening night. Now they lost their next game. So,
Yes.
you know, they've split the 2 games, but at least they won banner night, right?
They won banner night, and they did a very good job of getting out to an early lead against Boston. I mean, you know, by the second period, they had just separated themselves. So they at
Mhm.
least got up for the big banner moment. They didn't disappoint the home crowd in that one. And, I think the Florida Panthers will be contenders again this year.
Yeah, I think so. I think, the Ottawa Senators, which, we're going to talk about a little bit more in our next segment when we focus more on some individuals. But I think that they have some, interesting storylines themselves going that maybe gave them a little bit of jump against the defending cup champions in their first game. But I think that, you know, other than that, I think one of the biggest surprises early going was that first game between the Edmonton Oilers and Winnipeg Jets. Um, the Oilers getting completely destroyed by the Jets. And I said this on the Flyer show, but I feel partially responsible because I picked the Oilers to go back to the Stanley Cup final. I did pick the Jets to maybe drop a little from the point total they had last season because I thought that was unsustainable for them. But I think both teams proved me wrong in game one. But game one is not the full season. So
No,
we'll see how
it
it
is
goes for
not.
both teams.
But, to me, the biggest surprise was that Edmonton was shut out. I mean, that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is not what I expected. If you would have told me, okay, Winnipeg won 3-2, or, even if they won 6-5, although, you don't expect Winnipeg to give up that many goals all that often, but to blank Edmonton with all that firepower that they have, that was a big surprise.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, it's tough when you have a team that has such, scoring power on it, to not get off to a good start. Now, we've seen an Edmonton team not get off to a good start and be successful in the end. So like we said, very early going. None of this is trend worthy, but I think it's just always fun to look at these initial games, and then at the end of the season, we could look back and kind of laugh at some of it, or
Yep.
be like, no, that was predictive of how the season would go. So for Edmonton, I'm sure they are hoping that they are able to get things together and get back to the Stanley Cup final, if not for anything else but my sake and my prediction being correct. Another team kind of on the other end of the spectrum here, the Buffalo Sabres. Man, they are 0-3 to start the season. Of course, getting blanked in the global series against the Devils to start the season. So it's a bit of an unusual way to start the season for this team. But I think for a lot of people, this is definitely a make or break season. Coaching change, a change in energy. And a lot of people were saying, yeah, maybe this team could, compete this year. And I feel like looking at the Sabres and Devils like Seth did, who stepped in last week when we were previewing the Global Series. He and I talked about both of these teams needing to make significant jumps this year. Sabres not off to a good start.
No, and when you've scored 3 goals in 3 games, that's total. That's not a good
Hmm.
start. And this is a team that for maybe the last 3 years, people have said, "Oh yeah, this is the year they make that
Hmm.
last jump and break the playoff drought." And every year they found a way to disappoint, whether it was because the goaltending didn't stand up or the defense didn't stand up or they weren't getting enough depth scoring. Always there was something that seemed to get in the way of the Buffalo Sabres. Uh, it is time for them to really right the ship. Otherwise, I think you're right. There will be major changes in Buffalo, and this 0-3 start with a -7 goal differential is not the start they were hoping for.
It is not it. Well, I did mention the Ottawa Senators briefly, and they have a new goaltender, and that's part of the individual storylines that we are going to talk about to start this season. And we are going to do that coming up next. We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. One of the things I love about it is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy because you can avoid all the busy work. You can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with all those candidates faster. They don't just help you hire faster, but 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. They leverage over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day. Their matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Listeners of Locked On NHL will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at indeed.com/locked on. Just go to indeed.com/locked on right now and support Locked On NHL by saying you heard about Indeed on the show. That's indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So let's get started with the topic I left off on with Linus Ullmark. As we know, he signed that big contract with the Ottawa Senators early this week. It is all sunshine and roses with him in the Ottawa Senators fandom right now. I think he said a lot of really good things about the city, about the team, about the energy. He's done, a couple of interviews that I've seen that, man, I can see why they love him
Yeah.
honestly, because it's been a struggle in Ottawa. And I think that, having a guy who's this enthusiastic about being there goes a long way. And then he goes and gets his first win as a Senators goalie in the regular season versus the defending Stanley Cup champions. I mean, you could not write a better story for a guy, right?
Other than maybe if he did it against Boston, yeah,
Well,
I think
yeah,
that's
that's
right.
true.
But 30 saves out of 31 shots for Olmark in that game. Like you said, doing it against the defending Stanley Cup champions and earning the win. And it just, I think it was really great for the fans of Ottawa and obviously for Linus Ullmark to get off to that good start. We talked about Buffalo in the last segment. Ottawa is another one of those teams that people are waiting for them to take that next step, and bringing in a world-class goalie like Linus Ullmark was an important part of it. And for him to get off on the right foot and just show what he's capable of doing, I think that is a real positive. Obviously, again, it's early. There's still, 81 games left, but you want to start strong, and Linus Ullmark certainly did that.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting just because, again, you look at the contrast of his arrival in Ottawa, him signing a new long term deal versus what Jeremy Swayman went through in Boston, the guy who stayed behind. And, they got the same AAV when it
Yeah,
all is said and
yeah.
done. Now, obviously, the Swayman contract is longer, but I think, there was no other way to do it, right? In terms of the money, like they're kind of on equal footing in a lot of ways. So I think just the drama around Swayman makes this story of Olmark in Ottawa just seem so much smoother and beneficial in comparison.
Yeah, a lot less of a distraction,
Mhm.
by far, and I wonder how that's going to affect the start of both of those teams.
Yeah, I think so. Which, looking at Boston, a standout there in a good way, Elias Lindholm off to a really good start with the Bruins. As we know, he spent a lot of time in Carolina, and then he's been in Calgary with like a little bit of time in Vancouver after trade deadline. And he wound up in Boston this season and 4 points in 2 games played so far.
Yeah, he has looked really good, and he has both an assist on the power play and shorthanded already, and just seems to be doing a great job. And oh yeah, by the way, slight surprise, 5 block shots in 2 games for Lindholm as well.
Yeah, I think, he is that well-rounded player, and
Yeah,
that's, why you want him on your team, and I think that, Boston is a team to me that's at a crossroads right now. Can they keep this up? Is this their last shot? And so for a guy like Lindholm, who's a vet who has that experience, but also the skill, like, is he going to keep them, floating for a little bit longer? Is he going to be one of those guys that can keep the momentum of this Boston team ahead? And so he's definitely a guy that I will want to keep an eye on for this season moving forward. I think, you look at some of the younger guys. Obviously, the first name that comes to mind here is Macklin Celebrini, getting that first NHL goal out of the way really quickly, so there's no drama about that, right?
yeah, and put that to bed. He doesn't have to worry about had he gone 3 4 games without a goal, the
Mhm.
pressure starts building. He looked really, really solid in that first game, and I think we're going to see a pretty productive rookie season from Celebrini this year.
Yeah, and as we know with the Bedard, watch last year, it took him until I think his second game before he got a goal, so for Celebrini to, like, get that done, I think is really good, and I think, for me, this is such a big part of this Sharks season where, they're playing with house money, there's almost no expectations on this team, and they can go out there, have fun, develop their young players, to build the fan base, to support this young player movement they have going on there. And I just think like if you're a Sharks fan or you're wanting to be a Sharks fan, now is a great time to hop on board with this team. And Macklin Celebrini is a huge part of that. But I'm looking forward to seeing, how he does. I don't really feel any competition per se, like with Matvey Michkov of the Flyers. Obviously he hasn't played a game yet, but I think for me, Michkov getting the Calder or being the highest scorer or whatever, that does not matter to me. So I'm here for all the Macklin Celebrini hype, and if he winds up getting the Calder or the scoring title for rookies or whatever, I am here for it. So it'll be fun to watch him play all season long. Another young player who we talked about their team in the first segment, the Utah hockey team, Dylan Guenther. Man, off to a tremendous start. Obviously, scoring the first goal in Utah history, as well as the first OT winner in Utah history. Gotta love what the kid is doing so far.
Yeah, and 4 goals in 2 games, not a bad start for Dylan Guenther, and he just really has great awareness. Where
Yeah.
he goes on the ice. He just has a high hockey IQ. and seems to be taking advantage of those opportunities. Do I expect him to keep this pace? Absolutely not. But,
No.
great to see him off to a strong start, and he's a big reason that Utah is 2-0.
Yeah, there's a couple, more than a couple other guys with
Yes.
uh 4 points so far. Elias Lindholm is one of them that we've talked about already. Jack Eichel has 4 assists. Logan Cooley has 4 assists. But I think like when those 4 points to start the season are all goals, I mean, I think that's just like a little bit extra above and beyond maybe what some of these other guys have done so far. Not to diminish that in any way, but especially for a new team and with everything, I think that it's a really cool story for him.
It is. And everyone loves the goal scorers. The playmakers don't get the respect.
That is sometimes true. Gotta just mention Ivan Barbashev, who's another 4 pointer this early in the season. 2 goals and 2 assists. Not too shabby himself, but I think some of these individuals who you love to see them at the top of the scoring charts early in the season before your regulars start taking over the list. I'm sure it won't be long before Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and all those guys start creeping up the scoring charts. But a lot of fun with some of these guys to start the season. In the meantime, we've got a full weekend of NHL action ahead. So excited to talk about that. We'll do it coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And look, October, there is so much to bet on. Great time of year in sports. Check out all the odds at FanDuel. You've got the baseball playoffs, college and pro football, NHL now in full swing. Check out the odds for your favorite team at FanDuel. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.
All right. Like I said, we have a full weekend of NHL action ahead. Tonight, 3 of the 5 teams that have yet to play a game get going. We have the Tampa Bay Lightning at Carolina Hurricanes. Now, they had a scheduled game for Saturday night as well, which is postponed because that was supposed to have been in Tampa, obviously, with the actual Hurricane Milton causing a lot of damage there. Our heart goes out to anyone affected by the storm. But of course, that means they're not playing a game in Tampa in the immediate time span. So at least their first game, they're able to play at Carolina tonight. I think, for Tampa, it's got to be tough, like with a little bit of a distraction of what's going on at home, right?
No doubt, no doubt. They're dealing with a lot more than hockey right now, and our hearts go out to everyone affected in Florida, by Milton. So it's a tough time, and you wonder whether or not it will affect them on the ice tonight.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, you know, the hockey maybe will help, with a distraction for fans as well. But it should be a tough game. I think it'll be a fun game to watch. I think, both teams are itching to get going on the ice. And I think that both teams have a lot to prove this year with wanting to maintain like kind of the strength that they've had in the past. And there's some questions about it for both teams. So I think that'll be interesting. We have the Blackhawks heading in to Winnipeg, and then my Flyers will be opening their season in Vancouver. Now, this is going to be really interesting because we have the debut of Matt Mitchkov, but also the Canucks lost in just embarrassing fashion to the Calgary Flames in their season opener. where they had a 4-1 lead at one point in the game and
Yeah,
wound up losing 6-5 in overtime. Head coach Rick Tocchet absolutely chewed them out post game. So the Canucks are going to want to come back, unfortunately, for the Flyers here. I think, the Canucks have a lot of pride to play for in this one.
they do, and high expectations after last year. It's a tough spot for the Flyers to walk into. I mean, I'm sure the paint was peeling in the Vancouver locker room after that loss.
Yeah, absolutely. So that should be an interesting one for Canucks fans at the very least. And then the other game that night tonight is the Blues heading into Vegas, and the Blues make it 3 in a row. We will see. But on Saturday, that's when we have the large majority of the weekend games. We have the Washington Capitals hosting the Devils. The Devils have already played 3 games, so how does that difference factor into things for each team, do you think?
I think it does factor in. I mean, there is a certain look, you can talk all you want about preseason games. The pace isn't the same. The pace in practice isn't the same. New Jersey will have a slight advantage because they've played 3 games and, they've won 2 out of the 3. I think, the Capitals are at home. That will help them. And it's a division rivalry game. So that also helps. Should be a good one. And this begins Alexander Ovechkin's
Yep.
attempt to break Wayne Gretzky's goal record this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So that should be one to watch. The Ducks, again, who haven't played yet, are in San Jose. Will Celebrini score again? We have, Cutter Gauthier in Anaheim looking to make an impact. So I think that'll be a fun game to watch for looking at young talent, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And these are 2 teams that are in rebuilding mode, not high expectations for this year. You said, San Jose, for example, was playing with house money. And yet with that little pressure, maybe you're going to see some pretty good hockey, I think, at times from these 2 teams this year.
Yeah, I think so. I think another interesting game is going to be the Preds at Detroit. Both teams are 0-1 so far, and I think that a lot of expectations in Nashville with all the changes they've made. Detroit is a make or break year, and this is a great way to set the pace for both teams.
Yeah, yeah, and you don't want to start 0-2, especially with the expectations both of these teams had. I think it may take Nashville, because of all the new additions, they may not get off to a very fast start. But once they gel and they get a
Yeah.
little more chemistry, look out.
Yep, I think that is spot on. Utah is going to Madison Square Garden for the first time. I think that should be interesting. Like, will this momentum carry them through such a tough environment to play in? I think that'll be a big game to watch as well.
Yeah, and the Rangers, they still don't have their Igor Shesterkin situation ironed out. So how will that affect him and the team? Will that be a distraction? Utah's on a roll. 3 in a row would be unbelievable if they can pull that off.
Yeah, and then the Oilers have a chance at redemption against the Chicago Blackhawks. I think that's a good opponent for them to try and get back on the horse.
Yeah, I think it is a good opponent for them to face at this point. Although, if they lose, and they lose bad, boy, that would. But you know what? Where was Edmonton at the end of October last year?
Yeah, I
I
know.
mean, they're
Uh,
capable of turning it around and turning it around in a hurry.
Yeah, well, the good news is they face the Flames, their Alberta rivals, the next night, who will be coming off a back to back. They'll be on the second half of a back to back as well. So I think that'll be a fun game to watch on Sunday. The Minnesota Wild will be in Winnipeg. I think, the Wild are an often overlooked team in a lot of scenarios, but I think they have a lot going for them this year. We saw how the Jets opened the season. This should be a fun game.
Should be. Minnesota, maybe it's the lack of a superstar. Maybe it's just that they're kind of overlooked. They're low key, but they do get the job done. and they may surprise a few people.
Yeah, I think so. And then the Kraken will be in Dallas again. Both teams. There's a lot of like both teams on back to backs playing Sunday. This is another instance of that. And I think the Kraken are a team with a lot to prove this year. Dallas is trying to claw their way back to a contending position. I think getting these points early is going to be really important for both teams.
Absolutely. And, the Kraken are hoping to bounce back after a disappointing year last year. Dallas was so close in the West. They've got to be considered one of the top contenders. It should be a good matchup out West.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Lots and lots of fun hockey ahead this weekend. It's so great to be talking actual regular season games again. That will do it for today's show. Of course, Gil, you'll be back on Monday to discuss all the latest goings on around the league with hosts from around the Locked On NHL network. We'll be back next Friday to discuss the week that was, as well as look ahead to week 2 of the NHL. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On NHL Prospects podcast covering the future stars of the NHL all year long, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.